From John. I give you a new commandment. Love each other. Just as I have loved you, so you must love each other. This is how everyone will know that you are my disciples, when you love each other.
This first gospel lesson is from John 19. Since it was the day of preparation, the Jews did not want the bodies left on the cross during the Sabbath, especially because that Sabbath was a day of great solemnity. So they asked Pilate to have the legs of the crucified men broken and the bodies removed. Then the soldiers came and broke the legs of the first and of the other who had been crucified with him. But when they came to Jesus and saw that he was already dead, they did not break his legs. Instead, one of the soldiers pierced his side with a spear, and at once blood and water came out. He who saw this has testified, so that you also may believe. His testimony is true, and he knows that he tells the truth. These things occurred so that the scripture might be fulfilled. None of his bones shall be broken. And again, another passage of scripture says, they will look on the one whom they have pierced.
From John. After these things, Joseph of Arimathea, who was a disciple of Jesus, though a secret one because of his fear of the Jews, asked Pilate to let him take away the body of Jesus. Pilate gave him permission, so he came and removed his body. Nicodemus, who had at first come to Jesus by night, also came bringing a mixture of myrrh and aloes, weighing about 100 pounds. They took the body of Jesus and wrapped it with spices in the linen cloths, according to the burial customs of the Jews. Now there was a garden in the place where he was crucified, and in the garden there was a new tomb in which no one had ever been laid. And so, because it was the Jewish day of preparation and the tomb was nearby, they laid Jesus there.
Both Joseph of Arimathea and Nicodemus, up to this point, had been what you might call secret followers of Jesus. I think only God knew. And it took great courage for Joseph to ask Pilate for Jesus' body. We know from other scripture that Joseph was a good man, a righteous man. And we've encountered Nicodemus twice before in John's gospel. Once he visited Jesus by night, not wanting anyone to know that he was there. And in the process, Nicodemus came to understand that all of his religious activities and obedience to the law of Moses wasn't enough. He must be born of the Spirit. And now, after Jesus has been crucified, Nicodemus joins Joseph in giving Jesus a proper burial. Joseph went to Pilate to ask for the body, while Nicodemus provided about 70 pounds of myrrh and aloes to fold into the linen wrappings that would go around the body to actually offset the smell. So the two men took Jesus' body from the cross and prepared him for burial and laid him in Joseph's new tomb, his personal new tomb, where no other bodies had ever been placed. And in the midst of all of this, consider the following. The disciples who had followed Jesus when he was alive and had claimed their willingness to die with him disappeared when he was arrested and crucified. And according to Scripture, only John had come back to the scene of the cross. But Joseph and Nicodemus, who had hesitated to follow Jesus publicly when he was alive, were now risking everything. Their reputations, their safety, after he died. After he died. Why? Why? Well, the scripture we heard Bonnie read just prior to what Sydney read is the final scene at the cross. These men had been present and watched the crucifixion. They had actually watched Jesus die. They'd watched Jesus die this brutal death. And thanks to them, very frankly, Jesus' body wasn't left on the ash heap with the rest. And now what? Now it was the Jewish Sabbath. It was Saturday. So you may be wondering, why are we in essence slowing down and stopping here? Why are we taking time here in this painful, confusing, desperate place called Holy Saturday? Why are we pausing? Why are we waiting in this scriptural place, this seemingly nowhere and nothing place? I mean, come on. This is uncomfortable. The story is uncomfortable. Waiting is uncomfortable. And I think we feel justified in skipping over this because, frankly, we know how the story turns out. But at this point, see, the disciples do not. And we need to sit with them for at least a moment. We have to. Everything they've worked for and believed in appears to be at an end. A gruesome and violent end. Jesus was labeled a criminal, as well as all of his followers. In this scripture, we see that a couple of Jesus' followers have done what they can in the time they had available. And now it's Saturday. Now it's the Jewish Sabbath, and the disciples can do nothing with the exception of reading scripture and praying. Imagine your world has just been completely turned upside down, and you constructively cannot do anything about it, except possibly to read scripture and to pray. It's the Sabbath. You have 24 hours to just sit tight with your pain and your anguish and your racing thoughts. You have 24 hours just to sit tight with your questions and your rage and your sorrow. And yes, you can pray. But what to pray? The worst has already happened, hasn't it? It would seem all is lost. It would seem there is no hope. And my assumption, depending on your age and stage in life, is that this kind of sense of despair, in some way, for many of you, you can relate to this in a personal way. Believe it or not, this is a form of holy time. The first time I ever heard the expression holy time was the same time I was learning about the word hospice. It was back in 2001, long before seminary. It was an awakening time in my life. A good friend and neighbor, 46 years old, with a loving husband and a 10-year-old daughter, the same age as my daughter, was dying from a reoccurrence of breast cancer. originally diagnosed when our daughters were just entering kindergarten. I didn't know her then. She'd been in the neighborhood longer than I had, and she had plenty of friends. And word was, over time, she beat the cancer. She had the reconstructive surgery. She was back to her normal life, and we all breathed a sigh of relief. That's the way we want those stories to turn out. And then as our daughters were entering second grade, Joni's cancer returned with a vengeance. And Joni and I became good friends following the reoccurrence. She did absolutely everything she could do to beat that cancer a second time. The year our girls were in fourth grade, Joni died 2 days after Christmas. Just a few weeks before her death was the first time I'd ever heard the word hospice. It was also the first time I ever heard the expression holy time. And I've come to understand that hospice and holy time usually go together. I had come to the church to ask our former lead pastor at that time, now that Joni's in hospice, what do I do? What do I do now? And he pointed out to me that this was holy time, limited and precious, and that I was to spend time with Joni as long as that's what she wanted. Holy time. Time that is limited and precious, and if you're fortunate, you're aware. And in a way, isn't that each of our lives in this world? Limited and precious. What experiences in your life have adjusted your perspective on what is truly valuable and have made a difference in how you use your holy time? Theologian Mary Ludy writes, one of the most bracing claims of traditional Christianity is not that God fully dwelled in the man Jesus, but that the man Jesus in whom God fully dwelled was also fully human and actually died. Union with God spared Jesus none of death's psychological anguish. His physical pain was not more bearable because of it. His death was no charade, and like ours, his hope of resurrection was a matter of trust, not a secret certainty he possessed because he was God. On this holy Saturday, the whole church wonders, with God now dead, we pose the question to an empty sky, is there life for you, Holy One? Is there life for us after we too descend to the grave? And for the world now groaning, life? I have assured dying mortals that they will live. I have consoled families with promises of reunion, and in my own way, because of Easter, I believe every word. But here, now, on Saturday, it's up for grabs. Today, we know nothing. We hold our collective breath and wait. We wait by the grave and hope. Hope against hope as the night wears on and the morning comes. Into your hands, O God, we commend our spirits in this holy time. We mourn and wait and see.
Easter Sunday, the third gospel lesson. Early on the first day of the week, while it was still dark, Mary Magdalene came to the tomb and saw that the stone had been removed from the tomb. So she ran and went to Simon Peter and the other disciple, the one whom Jesus loved, and said to them, "They have taken the Lord out of the tomb, and we do not know where they have laid him." Then Peter and the other disciple set out and went toward the tomb. The two were running together, but the other disciple outran Peter and reached the tomb first. He bent down to look in and saw the linen wrappings lying there, but he did not go in. Then Simon Peter came following him and went into the tomb. He saw the linen wrappings lying there, and the cloth that had been on Jesus' head not lying with the linen wrappings, but rolled up in a place by itself. Then the other disciple, who reached the tomb first, also went in, and he saw and believed, for as yet they did not understand the scripture that he must rise from the dead. Then the disciples returned to their homes, but Mary stood weeping outside the tomb. As she wept, bent over to look into the tomb. And she saw 2 angels in white sitting where the body of Jesus had been lying, one at the head and the other at the feet. They said to her, "Woman, why are you weeping?" She said to them, They have taken away my Lord, and I do not know where they have laid him." When she had said this, she turned around and saw Jesus standing there, but she did not know that it was Jesus. Jesus said to her, "Woman, why are you weeping? Whom are you looking for?" Supposing him to be the gardener, she said to him, "Sir, if you have carried him away, tell me where you have laid him, and I will take him away." Jesus said to her, "Mary." She turned and said to him in Hebrew, "Rabboni," which means teacher. Jesus said to her, "Do not hold on to me, because I have not yet ascended to the Father. But go to my brothers and say to them, I am ascending to my Father and your Father, to my God and your God." Mary Magdalene went and announced to the disciples, "I have seen the Lord." And she told them that he had said these things to her.